Welcome to another episode of Cheers, Dears. Today we are joined by author Jack Roney, who is a former child protection detective and is from Australia. Jack, welcome to the show.
G'day, Sherry. I'll say good morning from here in Australia. I believe it's late in the afternoon there, so great to speak to you. Thanks for having me.
Now, it's so interesting how we find each other these days. And, with every other city and whatever kind of stage of quarantine or what have you. But I was fortunate enough to meet Jack, or to be introduced to Jack, via Instagram. He was on a walk with his dog on the way down to the duck pond and was talking about what inspired his story, The Angels Wept. And I was like, this is already interesting. 10 seconds into this, let's keep watching. And you emerged as a double icon of sorts for me because I'm a huge true crime fan. So with your experience in fighting crime and investigating crime, and with you as an author, I was like, okay, I have to pay attention to this guy. And it took me a shamefully long time to actually buy your book. But when I did, oh my gosh, it was one of the best reads I've had. And I fell so in love with your character, which I'll talk about a little bit more before I continue to just keep spilling it out. But one of the things that really stood out about your book was that the main character, Jared O'Connor, treats every person to the best that he can with dignity, respect, and humanity, which really sets him apart from a lot of the other characters in the book. And he was just such an incredible human being that he didn't feel like a character on the page. He was somebody who was one of the most realistic characters I've ever encountered. And in this intro video, when you were walking your dog to the duck pond, you talked about how this book was sort of therapeutic for you. And if you could please start us off by telling us how this book was therapeutic for you and a little bit more about The Angels Wept.
Yeah, thanks. I often get asked the question, where did the story come from? And for me, I just started writing. I always say I started writing when I felt I had something to say. I've been a police officer and a detective in that child protection area for a number of years. And I always had an interest in writing, but I'd never really given it a go. And I've always been a fan of the likes of James Patterson. I have always liked the crime thriller genre when I'm reading. So I was exposed to a particular homicide investigation, which I drew some similarities in my writing. There was a homicide investigation where a couple were murdered and there were some children involved. And it was my job to interview those to interview those children about what they'd seen. I better have a sip of coffee. I'm croaky already. So that was one of the inspirations, along with a whole range of other inspirations that I drew from my operational policing career and experiences. And I guess I didn't realise at the time just how much I was carrying around inside me. And I started to write. At the time, I didn't realise that that was my way of kind of just purging all the darkness, the stuff that I was carrying around. When I look back and look at it now, retrospectively, I can see that I needed to do that. I didn't realise it, but I needed to do that to kind of purge myself of all the frustrations that I was carrying around inside me. So my way of doing that was to start writing a fictional story based on my own personal experiences. So what happened was I virtually started to bleed onto the page the way I was feeling. So a lot of what you read in that first book was very much about how I was feeling at the time. And I guess there are a lot of similarities between my own experiences and what you do read in the book. So when I wrote the first chapter, which ends up being about chapter 5 in the book now, which is a pivotal murder scene. That was the one that I really tried my hand at writing. And when I thought I can actually do this, and I really enjoyed the process, I then started to construct this whole fictional plot around this pivotal scene. And over a number of years of editing and rewriting and so on, I eventually formed this whole storyline. And I do have to stress that it is all fiction. It's not based on any particular people, but certainly the way I portrayed the world was because of what I had seen and experienced. And they often talk about sometimes with fiction, you can be a lot more truthful about the world when you write fiction compared to non-fiction, because you can be brutally honest about what are the real issues in the world, and you can sort of convey that through a fictional story, and you can really convey that through the way the characters are feeling. So So really, when I wrote that first book, I think it was just a way for me to express the way I was feeling and the things I was carrying around. Some people might write a diary or speak to people. I tended to probably bottle it up, and there was an expectation that you have to be strong and you have to do the job, and it can't get to you. So when I left that line of work, I was a child protection detective for about 14 years, working in different areas, and I did work in a regional town similar to the setting in the book. I've since moved on to other parts of policing, and my career took a different direction. But when I look back, I think I needed to do that. I needed to write my story, get it on paper, close the book to that chapter of my life, and then move on. And then when I wrote book two, and book two is currently being edited, and book three is also in draft phase. That was more about me discovering the craft of writing and just telling a good story. So book one was more about being therapeutic and sharing my own personal experiences. Book two was just about writing a good yarn, a really good story, and really challenging myself to be a good thriller writer. And then book three, I really took it to the next level, and I was really challenging myself to really take the story a little bit darker. And Jared really gets thrown into some really challenging situations, and there is this sort of spiraling out of control to some extent. So that's kind of been my writing journey for those three books.
I'm in awe that, I mean, of course we all grow as we continue to write, but I thought the first one was very well written, so I can't wait to see how much you've grown and to see your growth through the next few books. It's really exciting to hear.
Yeah, thanks.
So from there, I have to ask, what is your signature drink that you have for us here today?
Yeah, so we spoke about it before. So Bundaberg rum. So I'm a Queenslander. So I live in Brisbane in the state of Queensland, Australia. I was originally I was born in a town called Toowoomba, which is in Queensland. But this Bundaberg rum, Bundaberg is a town in Queensland, and it's a sugarcane town. So this rum is made from sugarcane. So it's quite an iconic drop here in Queensland and in Australia. So what we refer to as Bundy rum is Bundaberg rum. So it's a very rich, very rich, oaky tasting rum because of the fact it's made from sugarcane. So I usually will drink this with say Coke. It's probably a little bit too bitter just to drink on its own with ice, but yeah. So that's my signature drink, Bundy rum.
And I'm sure they'll love to hear all about this. Of this lovely interview we've done here. And I really tried my darndest as we talked in the green room to find a Bundy room here in the States. But the closest I could get was the Bundaberg ginger beer, which it claims is made in Australia. So that's what we're going to go with. And I did add some local rum to stay in the spirit of the spirits. And so cheers to this interview with your coffee. Yes.
A little bit. A little bit early on a Sunday morning to be drinking rum, so I thought I'll cheers with a coffee this morning. But you've done very well to find that Bundy, is it the ginger beer? You've done very well to track that down.
Thank you. So now we've heard a little bit about the premise of the story and a little bit about what the actual first book is about. And throughout the story, we encounter a lot of different characters. There's actually a lot of minor characters in this book. And as you introduced each one of them, it wasn't just a shallow character. It was every person you brought forward had a background. And it didn't matter if they were sort of a morally gray character or someone who was trapped in the system. They had background and a meaning for being where they were. So that brought in a lot of psychology, which I really appreciated and I thought was very good because it added those layers. And you had characters like Billy Mason, who I absolutely loved. I thought he was just such a great character. And then we had somebody like Thomas Barton, who the system totally failed. And for those who haven't read your book yet, can you please describe what the system looks like? And based on your experience, what changes would you like to see happen to improve the system?
Yeah, so those two characters were my way of describing what I think the system currently is, and I think it's probably no different to probably where you are. But the whole issue of juvenile crime and the reasons why young people commit offences, and whether it's nature versus nurture. In my view, in most cases, a lot of it is the home background. and the circumstances that these kids find themselves in. A lot of these kids that are part of the system, either as because they're victims of neglect or abuse at home, often enter the system as young offenders because they end up in foster homes. They get bad influences, and then they go off the rails. So I know here in Australia, and certainly in Queensland, there's been a lot of emphasis on trying to really focus on addressing youth crime and through addressing a lot of social issues, accepting that it's not just a policing issue, it's a whole community issue and a joint response. So that's kind of the way we're dealing with it, and I think we're having some successes with that. But the courts are very limited as to what they can do. If you look at a very punitive approach, purely punishment versus trying to get people back on track. So it's an ongoing challenge, and it always will be. But in terms of those two characters, when I introduced them, I introduced them mainly to kind of convey the message around here's these two young boys who have been exposed to different circumstances that have led them to where they are, both in trouble with the police. But ironically, the information they provide to the police is quite pivotal to helping solve the crime and leading to a conclusion in the story. So even though I've implanted them fairly early in the story, and I suppose early on you might be thinking, what's the relevance of this character other than the sad tale behind who they are and what's led them to their current circumstances? But they each provide pivotal information due to their relationship with the detective, and that was something that I guess I enjoyed working in a small town, that you're dealing with these juvenile offenders who might go and steal cars, break into houses, and get involved in drugs and alcohol and antisocial behaviour. But sometimes I formed quite a good rapport with these kids. And when you're living in a small town, in my case, I was in a small town for 11 years, and I come to know these kids from when they were 8, 9, 10 years of age to young adults, and they'd come back and see me, and they might have reformed or got themselves back on track, and it was due to that rapport that they will talk to you. And so that was sort of what I was conveying in my story, that the detective had this rapport with both the offenders, and on both occasions he arrested them, put them in custody for offences they'd committed, but he still had this relationship with them to the point where they could feel comfortable to speak to him and provide him with very crucial information, and then that led to helping him solve the mystery.
Yeah, it goes back to the observation I made about how Jared treats everybody excuse me, how Jared treats everybody with respect and dignity, and he buys Billy a meat pie, and he makes sure that the kids feel comfortable in the interview room. And there was a scene where you took the time to go into great detail describing the special children's room that Jared and his partner created for I don't want to say interrogating the children, but to talk to them when they go through these difficult circumstances. And it was so beautifully written and so descriptive. It actually brought me to tears, because here you have this very intense situation, but you have somebody like Jared who put together this safe place in a police headquarters for the children to feel at home, to feel comfortable, to be able to draw or play or whatever it was, to be quote unquote normal for just a moment in this very abnormal situation. And it got me thinking, was that something that you were involved in or saw in real life or brought together in real life?
Yeah, that does now happen. Back in my early days in working in that area, I was at a particular station, and we had to build this, what we call a home lookalike room for interviewing children. We have provisions here that when you're obtaining a statement from a child about what they saw, we can obtain that version on an audio video recording, and then that can then be played to the court as their evidence. It has to be done by officers who are trained in conducting what we call eye care, interviewing children and recording evidence under the provisions of the Evidence Act. So the officer has to be trained to elicit the information from the child without asking leading questions, so that the information or the evidence provided by the child is not later deemed to be inadmissible in court. So when you're dealing with a child who's witnessed a homicide or is a victim to sexual abuse, for example, it's very important to make sure that the investigator knows how to do their job and ask the questions appropriately, but also to do it in a setting where the child's more likely to be comfortable. So what we did, we actually did it ourselves. We painted the walls, we had donations, we had lounge chairs, toys, coffee tables, to make it look like a home lounge room, a living room. with colouring books and these sort of things, teddy bears. And we used it many, many times in real investigations, and it's still being used to this day. And that wasn't sort of groundbreaking. This was being done quite widely. So that's a fairly standard thing now in our police stations, where there is a child protection investigation unit. They'll have a home lookalike room for that purpose. And that's why I introduced that into the story, because I was trying to make it as realistic as possible. And that's something I've always endeavoured to do with my writing, is to try and describe things as they are. And that's the advantage that I have as being a police officer and having been a detective. I pride myself on conveying a certain amount of accuracy. So that was just one example, and I have been experienced in interviewing children who have witnessed horrific things, and we have used those home lookalike rooms for that purpose.
And it was so clear that this scene was written from the heart, or at least from something you had experienced personally, because of just how you. I don't know if it's because of my writing background, but it was how detailed it was, that it felt like you weren't just there here, you were there here as well. And for somebody who's been very fortunate to not have been in any of these situations, yeah, I wouldn't know what the room would look like or what the experience would be for the child. So, I was very grateful to get to see that and experience it through these characters, but to also get an idea, knowing your background, that this is what it's like. And that was it's a really special book in that sense, because you're not just writing from research, you're writing from what you know, and writing it very well, and bringing somebody, again, like me, who has no experience in any of this, full into the scene, to now I think I know the radio call signals for the different situations happening in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, and thank you. I'm so pleased that my writing has resonated with you, and it's very humbling that you say that. So thank you. And I guess as a writer, that's what we're striving to do, is we're trying to convey realism and make it authentic and plausible, so that people can become immersed in the story. And it is always the trick of trying to find the balance between pushing the story forward and not getting too trapped in all this eloquent prose and bogging the story down with too much description. So I try to describe the scene as much as necessary for the reader, and then push on and continue the story forward. But certainly realism is something that I strive for in my stories.
Now, on that line of realism, Jared and Brad encounter a lot of internal discrimination from their fellow investigators. Was this something that you encountered in real life? And was there any improvement in, if you did encounter it, with this discrimination over the years?
Yeah, it was something I have experienced, and I think that's not the case now. But and I did convey some internal conflict within the police ranks of my story. There was this kind of view some years ago that the detectives who were in my line of work, what was called the Juvenile Ad Bureau, or it's now called the Child Protection Investigation Unit, were a lower standard detective, because we're dealing with kids, we're the kiddie cops, and we're not real police. And there were these some old school detectives who kind of felt that they were a higher class of detective because they were, dealing with adults. My comeback would be, well, we're dealing with interviewing children who have been offended against by adults, and you need a lot of skill to be able to conduct these interviews with children. And then we would go and arrest the offender, who was an adult. So we were skilled at both interviewing children, gathering evidence for quite serious offences, yet we would still then have the skill to interview and charge the offender, who was an adult. So we had expertise in both areas. So that was only from my personal experiences, but I think the role of child protection detectives is certainly, our profile has raised significantly, and my colleagues that are out there today still doing that job, I take my hat off to them, and I'm no longer doing that line of work, but it's still happening every day of the week. But I think the reputation is now being recognised, and the work that is being done in that area is certainly been recognised, and the skill that they possess. I think, yeah, that sort of conflict that I talk about, maybe it was something I had to some degree experienced myself, but I don't think it's something that's endemic within our sort of police culture.
I'm really glad to hear that, and of course it's we take liberties with fiction, but it's also really good to hear that it has come away, and that the climate has changed, and people are realizing that, oh, this is a really difficult line of work, and giving it the respect it deserves.
Yeah, and it's really, really challenging work, and I did it for a long time. Probably looking back, I probably did it for too long because I was sort of in a very dark place, I think, at the end of it when I finally did leave and progressed my career to other things. But I'm so proud of the fact that I can say I did that and I contributed because it is a really challenging job because you're dealing with family situations. If you have a child that's in a neglectful situation, you have to go into a home and make a decision about, do we leave this child in this situation? How can, we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. If we walk away and leave that child in that situation and something bad happens, we're criticised for not taking action. Or if we, in conjunction with the Department of Children's Services, if a child is taken into care, well, then criticised as well. So you just have to make the best decision you can in terms of what's best for the child, given the risk factors for that particular child. So not only are you working with children at risk in abusive situations, you're also dealing with children who are committing offences and posing other people to risk because of their offending behaviour, stealing cars and driving dangerously and breaking into people's homes. So it's just incredibly busy. The juvenile crime rate is still there, and unfortunately, young people commit a lot of property-related offences. So it is a very, very difficult job. And for me, I made a career out of it for a long time. But then I got to the point where I felt, look, it's either going to be me or my job. For my own sanity, I need to move on. But it certainly is held in high regard because of the importance of the role. And also, having said that, the importance of getting these kids back on track before they get lost in the system as adults, and trying to intervene and trying to divert them away from the court process and the justice system early is just critical. And sometimes we win and we do and succeed. Other times we don't, and unfortunately, these kids go on to do some serious jail time as adults.
There's a line in your book, something to the effect of, "There's not many high points or victories, but it's the ones that do come through are the ones that make the job worth it." And you said it much more eloquently than that, but I mean, I think that's so true. And what Jared thinks about several times throughout the book, where it's the same shit in a different day, um, it's so true and it's so realistic. And these are very serious, relevant issues that, whether you're in Australia or San Diego or wherever, are ringing true. And so, you know, being that this was in a different country, it still rang true to so many different things that I've seen and I've studied here. And, want to try to, because of your book and because of other things I've seen, want to try to see what can I do to try to help the system and try to help these kids or these children who are possibly trapped within it.
Because and you're correct, for the police, it can be very disheartening because usually the buck stops with us. As I said, this is a social issue and it's a community issue, but oftentimes the police are the ones asking, the community saying, what are you doing about it as the police? But we're saying it's not just our responsibility. It's a collective society issue. But when you're dealing with these cases time and time again, and you'll see generational, some families where it's just intergenerational and the same problems are continuing from generation to generation, and it's so frustrating. And some days you just feel like it's one step forward and three steps back, and you feel like you're not making progress. You're lost in paperwork, and again, all these feelings. I was feeling this way when I wrote my book, and that's why you'll see all these feelings expressed in my writing. It is very disheartening that sometimes you just feel, look, you go to all this effort, you apprehend an offender, put them before the courts, and then if they back out in the streets reoffending, you think, well, why did I do all that? Why did I put so much effort in? But you just have to keep fighting the good fight and keep remembering why did I swear an oath to be a police officer, and you just keep fronting up each day and you just keep doing it. And as you say, every now and then you do have a win, and it does remind you that we are doing this for a reason, and we can make a difference. Some days you do feel like you're not making a difference and you just get lost in everything that's happening in the world. But every now and then you do have a win. And I've had people come to me as 18, 19, 20-year-olds who come to me and visited me at the police station saying, you probably don't remember me, but you dealt with me when I was a 12-year-old, and because of what you said to me, you put me back on track. And then I think, well, that clearly that I made a difference in someone's life, and that's what makes you keep going when you're doing this job.
I love that. It's like that old. I think it's a. I don't know if it's a parable, but we have a story of a young man after a hurricane going to the beach and throwing the starfish that had washed ashore. And there's thousands of starfish that have come ashore, and he's throwing them back in one at a time. And some adult comes up to him and says, "Kid, you're not going to save all of them." And then he bends down, picks one up, and throws it back in, and says, "I saved that one." And it's the making the
Mm-hmm.
difference with
Right.
that individual in that moment and just being there for them. It goes a long way.
It's a really interesting analogy, that the starfish being swept onto the beach. I guess in my job, when I was working as a child protection detective and dealing with youth crime, you probably felt like that. You just felt like you were just every day overwhelmed with this, at times, a feeling that how can we stem the flow of this youth offending? But every now and then you do have a win. So that's why when I wrote my book, although I'm expressing some frustrations, I'm also talking about the fact that yes, we can make a difference, and I hope that's kind of the underlying theme is that Jared O'Connor, in terms of this particular story, these kids that have witnessed a pretty horrific crime, they've witnessed their parents being killed. He's come in with other police and support services, and they made a difference and they protected these kids. So that's for me is the underlying theme.
It does ring true. It does throughout the story, and it's a beautiful book. And listeners, go buy this book. Come on, how much more do we have to sell you on this? So we have here some listener questions. Our first one comes from Jenny from Chula Vista. And I think you did kind of touch on this, but she would like to know how much of your book or any of your books are inspired by real cases? And are you continuing to work with law enforcement for your current upcoming books?
I'll answer the last question first. I'm still currently a police officer, but I've taken a what we call a career break. So I've taken a year off work, um, just so I can reassess what my future is going to be. I've been with the police now for over 32 years, and I was very young when I joined, straight out of high school. And I've done a lot of things in my career, but I'm now unsure of my future, and I would really like to pursue my writing full time. It's very difficult to be an operational police officer and also a writer at the same time, so one might have to go. So I've just taken some time off work just to kind of reassess what my future is going to be in terms of working as a police officer or as an author. So that's currently where I'm positioned. But I'm no longer in that child protection work. I haven't worked in that area for a number of years. I was an instructor at the police academy. I've worked in media and communications and corporate areas and a whole range of other projects. So that's the second question. Sorry, what was the first question again?
The first one was how much of this book or your other books have been inspired by real life cases?
I think certainly this first book, very much so. But I would have to say the characters are not based on any one particular character. I think the characters are an amalgamation of people, whether it be conflict situations within the police or whether it be people that Jared has arrested or victims or offenders. They're an amalgamation of people that I've met over many years that kind of convey or sort of profile a particular type of person that I've met. So certainly a lot of the anecdotal stories are heavily influenced by my own personal experiences. The overall storyline plot was a fictional story that I kind of used all those little anecdotes, put them together like a jigsaw puzzle, and then it sort of created this overall plot. That storyline is completely fictional, but certainly the characters along the way are heavily influenced by certain people I've met along the way.
Our next question comes from Tiffany from here in San Diego, and she would like to know, aside from writing, what did you do or have you done to keep yourself sane during quarantine? And were there any new hobbies or projects you picked up in that time?
Well, it's interesting that I've really refocused on writing. I was heavily involved in running a sporting club relating to playing soccer and indoor soccer, and I was heavily involved in that. And all sport came to a close, so I still had to go to work. A lot of people were in lockdown, but as a police officer, and I was actually working in a COVID response area, so I still had to go to work every day. So I was still working long hours. So my work life didn't change all that much because as police we still needed to go to work. But because my sporting commitments outside of work had ceased, um, it it reinvigorated my writing passion. And I actually wrote a whole novel last year, a fourth book, which is a standalone book, which has since been signed by a publisher and is due for release next year.
Wow.
I wrote that book last year commuting on the train. I had a little laptop computer, and for me, it's about a 35-minute commute on the train into the city every day. So I did about an hour of writing, about 30 minutes each way on this little tiny laptop. And I banged out an 80,000 word manuscript last year. In the peak of COVID, everything was going nuts. The world was upside down, and things were really busy. Yet I still found the time to write a novel, and it had nothing to do with COVID. It was a complete, it's a historical speculative fiction with a twist of time travel. So it wasn't inspired by COVID, but it just kind of goes to show that if you suddenly get the bug, you get an idea. There's really no reason to stop you from writing. So that's been sort of my COVID experience. For me, it's actually been very positive because it's allowed me to really refocus on what I want to do with my writing, to the point that I've taken some time off and I'm now focusing on it full time.
Oh, how fun. It's so interesting how so much art has come out of the lockdowns, or from the various crises that we went through last year, and as a method of escape to some degree. We were just being bombarded with all different things from every which way, and having your hour a day on the train. I don't know, that's just such a beautiful way to spend that time commuting, just to do what you love, to write.
Yeah, and I went to a writers' conference yesterday, and this question came up about how do people find time to write with busy schedules, with young kids. Life goes on. Not many of us have the luxury of being a full-time writer and being able to spend our day writing. Life gets in the road. There's a lot of distractions, and you can easily find yourself on social media and looking at YouTube videos and in the name of research, but you start wasting time. So it just does go to show, if you're really motivated, you can get up early if you need to. And I spoke to a lady yesterday who's got young children, and she gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning and does 2 or 3 hours of writing before her kids get up, and then she embarks on her day. So there's really no excuse. If you have the bug to write, you just need to write, and you will find the time. We do waste a lot of time sitting in front of the TV, scrolling through social media. If you can squeeze out an hour or two a day, you can with some hard work and commitment, you can get through and write a full book. Over, for me, it probably took about 6 months to write an 80,000 word manuscript, but I was pretty regimented, quite disciplined, and I usually would also do another hour or two of writing at night. So I'd get in about 2 or 3 hours a day. But some days you might only write one sentence or one paragraph, and that's still a win because you've just been struggling over this one paragraph. You've just got to be persistent and keep working.
I love that. The writing habit is one of the things I like to say. It doesn't matter if what you write is absolute, nonsense, as long as you put your pen or your fingers to the keyboard and just do it. That keeps your skills sharp, and that keeps you thinking about the story. And I mean, of course we all get writer's block. Of course we all hit a wall at some point and need to walk away from it. But just having that discipline of writing something every single day, I think is huge, towards keeping yourself focused, which I think is the big part of it. Like you said, I mean, it's so easy to get lost in research. I mean, just yesterday, I'm writing a short story or a novella, and I wanted to look up what a gladius looked like, a Roman sword. And I ended up watching an hour show, Forged in Fire, because I then became so, lost in the research. And at the end of it, I was like, what did I just do? I just lost an hour of writing time because I got swept up into something else. So yeah, definitely having that discipline, or the reminder to, hey, stay focused. The project at hand is this, and embracing that writing bug.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's hard work. It's nothing glamorous about it. You're in solitude. It can be very a lonely task at times, but if you just can commit and keep writing, and that's the thing. And sometimes you do need, as you said, you need just get away. In my case, if I take my dog for a walk and just refresh the brain, and just get away from it. If you're too close to it, sometimes the cursor flashes on the screen, and it can be quite frustrating. So sometimes you do need to recognise when you have to just get up and give yourself a bit of a break and just let your brain marinate for a bit. I find that if I ever get stuck, or if I have writer's block, if I just go and read, that fills up my tank. I'm usually pretty good. I do pre-plan. They talk about plotters versus pantsers. I'm a plotter. I do like to plan ahead, and I build a structure first. I know where my story is going, and then I just add meat to the bones as I'm going, and I add new layers. But I do pre-plan. So if I have a plan, I tend not to get writer's block because I know what this chapter has to be written about, so I just write it. So everyone has the different process. I'm probably more methodical in the way I write, but yeah, recognizing there's the time to work and there's a time to take a break from it as well.
As a fellow plotter, I totally understand that, and it's for me, it's helps me stay focused and knowing where I'm going. Whether it's been a week since I've touched a particular project or not, I have that little note in the corner that says, "This is in this scene. This should happen." And then that helps me to go and helps me to be like, "Here we go," and just like you said, add meat to the project.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, our last listener question comes from Ronnie, who says or who asks, if you could change one thing about how you've published, what would it be and what would you like to see instead?
I look at my journey, and my journey is well under it's underway, but there's still a long way ahead. So I would like to think I'm fairly early in my writing journey. So when I wrote my first manuscript, I put it away for many years. I had it edited, and I sent letters to agents, and as we all had, we all experienced rejections, and I had plenty of rejections from agents and publishers, and um, entered some writing competitions, and it was shortlisted in one competition, and I thought, well, that's some validation that I can write okay. So I decided to self-publish the first book because I figured, I want to get it out, and that'll give me some element of control, and the technology is there now for us to self-publish. So I did that. I continued to learn the craft and attend writing courses and so on. Did a whole bunch of re-edits. Finally, The Angels Wept was born, and I self-published that. And I've continued working on, but I've continued writing. I've continued submitting into competitions. I've continued to attend writing classes and networking and writers' festivals and immersing myself in it. And then I had a recent success through a writing competition. I was offered a traditional publishing contract because I had some success in a writing competition. So I look back and think, because I had self-published my first book, I'd already established my author profile, a website and social media, and had already started to create a profile. I think publishers like to see that authors are taking matters into their own hands and can market themselves, because publishers are looking for authors that will contribute to marketing, because the publishers won't do it all for you. You need to be prepared
Right.
to really put yourself out there. So I think for anyone out there that's having some challenges with trying to pick up a traditional publisher, and it's very difficult to get picked up by a traditional publisher, have a crack at self-publishing and learn by making mistakes and start to build your profile, and still continue to apply to publishing companies and agents. And then if they see that you've really put some effort into your brand and your author brand, they may take a second look at you, because they'll often sign you for you as the author. They also want to see that you can write well and you've produced a good story. But if you're a marketable author, you're giving yourself a better chance. So that's been my story through self-publishing. It's opened up the doors to an opportunity to be signed by a traditional publisher. So I'm now experiencing both. So and I may well continue to self-publish other novels. But now that I've been given the opportunity to work with a reputable publisher, it's kind of opened up the doors, and I'm hoping it'll sort of propel me further. But I've had to go through those trials and tribulations to get to where I am at the moment. But still a long road ahead, that's for sure.
The journey never ends for us. That is for sure.
Yeah, and
And it's so true.
sorry, there's also
Okay.
around what I was having this conversation with quite a successful author yesterday about how do you determine success. Different people have different ideas of what is a successful author. Are you a bestseller and you've sold 1 million copies? Does that make you a success? Or are you successful because you published a book and sold 200, but you've had fantastic feedback and you're proud of what you produced? So I think success is different to different people. It may not necessarily be generating an income, because authors are probably the poorest people around, because not many authors make enough money to live off it. So most have a day job. So I think I think if you go into it thinking I'm only doing this to make money and be a household name and be a New York bestseller, I think you're setting yourself up for failure, because you may not achieve those lofty heights that you've set for yourself. So I think just set reasonable expectations, and if you meet those, well, then you can keep progressing.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with everything you just said, and how important it is for all authors, whether they're doing indie or traditional, to be prepared to market themselves, because the traditional publishers can't do it for every single author that they sign to. And so knowing that you have to learn a little bit about marketing as you're starting is huge, and presenting yourself as someone who's relatable. I mean, like I said, I came across you because you were walking your dog, and that was just something that I related to. And it's those moments where you're not just talking about buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. It's here's how I'm a fellow human being, and here are the things that I do that you may relate to as well, whether it's the rum you drink or, the coffee you have. It's those relatable details that people will connect with that'll make them want to follow you. And eventually, hopefully, a traditional publisher would want to put you on their payroll at some point, or on their royalty page at some point. And it really is. It's about making those connections and making yourself human to your readers.
And I think that's the most difficult part for authors. I think most of us are inherently introverts. I think that's what makes us, because we're happy to sit alone for hours on end, and we don't feel we need to. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, I guess, but I think a lot of authors are introverts, and are not necessarily comfortable with putting themselves out there. And that's something I've had to learn to do, because I was actually terrified to even tell anyone about what I was doing, particularly my work colleagues. Being a police officer writing crime fiction, it's sort of kind of not the done thing, and I was scared to tell people. And when I finally did, the support was just overwhelming, and I'd put all these fears on myself, and for the most part they were unfounded, because the support I've been given from my colleagues and friends and family, and my ever growing network has been fantastic. So you do have to overcome your own fears, and particularly fears of feedback and criticism and all that. That's all part of it. And you just take it on board. You take the feedback and you learn and grow. And but I think that's the scariest part of being a writer. If you want to do this, as we say, if you want to be fair income about it, you really need to make that decision. Am I prepared to put myself out there and market yourself? Go to book launches, do things that would ordinarily make you feel uncomfortable. But you kind of really have to. That it goes part and parcel. It's kind of, as I said at this conference I went to yesterday. Being an author is a business. You've produced a product and you're trying to sell that product. So you have to market yourself, your brand, and by doing so, you have to really, you have to put your business cap on, because people aren't going to find your book unless you put it in front of them. So you have to put yourself out there.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Well, Jack, thank you so much for this. What's next, and where can the people find you?
Yeah, social media. You'll find me on Instagram and Facebook, and I have a website. So Jack Roney. If you just Google that, you'll find me. Obviously my first book is out. My second book is called The Demons Woke. It's currently being edited right now, and it's due for release probably early to mid next year. And the third book, so it's a 3-book series. I'm hoping will be out by late next year. But while that's happening, while I've got those 3 books bubbling away, I've got this 4th book, which is a standalone book. I can tell you now, it's called The Ghost Train and Scarlet Moon. It's a historical speculative fiction with a twist of time travel. So it's a completely separate project which I'm working on through a publisher, and it's also due for release next year. So even though my crime series will continue, this other book will also come out as a completely separate thing. So I kind of figure I've got at least 18 months worth of work ahead of me just for these 4 books that I've currently got on the plate at the moment. And then I'll continue to work and market myself and continue to write. But then I'm thinking, what's the next thing? I'm always thinking of ideas of this could, as writers, we tend to see the world differently. We're always looking for inspiration for a story. And you do get that inspiration from your own personal experiences. But I think it's because we observe better the little things that we see that a lot of people don't see. And that's how we get inspired for stories. So I'm trying to think of what's going to be the idea that really captures people, and that one novel that I'm going to write, that I'm going to say that was it, that was that was the story that really propelled me. So I'm kind of using this as my apprenticeship, my first 4 books, and making mistakes and getting better as I go, and continue the journey and continue enjoying the journey. But I'm also I'm thinking this is going to be a long-term thing, and I'm already thinking about what book 5 is going to be. I don't know yet. I'm still open to ideas, but I really want it to be something that's going to appeal to a broad audience and something I'll be very proud of.
And I can't wait to read it, whatever it is. Well, Jack, again, thank you so much for joining us here today. And thank you, everybody, for watching and for listening. And I will be sure to have all of Jack's links and website and his book in the description box below. Again, Jack, thanks for joining me, and cheers.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks so much for your support and for this opportunity. It really means a lot, so thank you. It's been an absolute privilege to speak to you across the from the other side of the world. Thank you to technology. I think that's the one thing that the pandemic has brought us. It brought us closer through technology. So thanks for the opportunity. It's been absolutely lovely to chat to you.
A huge thank you goes to my sponsors, Salbom and Don W. And to see how you can help support this podcast, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/sfaxon.